Imagine waking up every morning on a continent that floats miles above an ocean of clouds, where the ground beneath your feet never truly touches the earth below, and the world you call home drifts gently on invisible currents of wind and light. Growing up here means you've never known the sound of waves crashing against a shore, or the sight of fog creeping across the ground, or even the feeling of standing on the same level as the horizon. Because on a floating continent in the sky, the horizon isn't a line at all, but a soft, curved blanket of endless white, stretching as far as your eyes can see, rippling like a calm sea frozen in time. And on your very first memory of stepping outside as a child, you weren't greeted by birds or trees or distant mountains, but by the sight of the world falling away beneath you, a vast drop disappearing into shimmering mist. This is a place where every sunrise paints the underside of the clouds in brilliant gold before spilling upward into a sky that seems impossibly close, where the air tastes cooler, thinner, and cleaner than any air found on the ground, and where life moves at a rhythm shaped not by cities or seasons, but by the gentle swaying of the continent itself as it drifts across the heavens. Living above the clouds means living in silence unlike anything found on earth. The wind becomes your constant companion, whispering softly along the cliffs, carrying with it a faint hum that comes from deep within the heart of the floating land. A hum people say you stop noticing after a few years, though it never fully disappears, like the heartbeat of a giant sleeping beneath your feet. From your earliest days, you grow up learning that the edges of your world are not metaphorical boundaries, but literal ones, giant cliffs that drop into a glowing abyss of white, and the adults around you always watch the children closely, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because standing at the edge of a floating continent is like standing at the doorway of infinity, beautiful, humbling, and slightly terrifying. Schools here begin each day not with bells, but with the soft vibration that runs through the ground as the continent slowly shifts to a different wind current, and children sit beside windows that open not to streets or playgrounds, but to vast skies where flocks of sky whales, massive, gentle creatures with wings like translucent sails, glide just beneath the clouds, so close that on some mornings the entire classroom pauses to watch their shadows drift across the cloud tops. And maybe the most surreal part of growing up above the clouds is the way sound behaves. Your voice never echoes downward. It simply disappears into the mist, while the wind sometimes carries faint echoes upward from storms happening far below, like distant drums muffled by miles of atmosphere. This world teaches you from childhood that gravity, weather, and the very fabric of daily life follow different rules up here. And everything, from the architecture to the way people walk, adapts to the gentle, perpetual breeze. Yet despite its strangeness, life feels peaceful, almost dreamlike, as if the entire continent exists in a slow, calming heartbeat above the rest of the world, suspended between sunlight and silence. And as you take your first steps out into a new day, the clouds glowing beneath you and the sky stretching endlessly above, you realize that growing up here means not just seeing the world differently, but living in a place where every moment feels like the beginning of a story no one on the ground could ever imagine. Most people who grow up on the floating continent hear dozens of theories about how it came to be, whispered like bedtime stories or debated softly during long walks along the windy cliffs. But the truth is that no one really knows whether this place was born naturally or crafted by a civilization far older than any recorded in human history. The elders say the land itself remembers the sky, claiming its roots never touched ordinary soil, that it was always meant to drift, as if the continent were carved from the bones of the atmosphere itself, while scientists, those few who dedicate their lives to studying the impossible, suggest that it might be the remnant of a colossal geological event, a chunk of earth ripped upward by forces beyond comprehension and frozen in the air by magnetic anomalies deep within its core. And if you dig far enough into the old texts, you'll find references to ancient mechanisms humming beneath the surface, mechanisms that no one has ever fully explored, because they run through tunnels only accessible from the underside of the continent, a place so dangerous and wind-battered that only the most skilled climbers and engineers dare approach it. Growing up here, you hear stories of explorers who descended too far and felt the continent breathe, as if the land responded to their presence, pulsing with a slow, gentle rhythm like the heartbeat of something alive. And while no one can prove these stories true, the idea lingers in your mind like a half-remembered dream. Some believe the continent is supported by invisible atmospheric columns, massive, naturally forming updrafts that push the land upward the same way water can carry a ship. Except these currents are impossibly stable, never shifting or weakening, as if held in place by some unseen architecture woven into the sky itself. Others swear that deep below the surface lies a buried lattice of metallic veins, a kind of forgotten technology that interacts with Earth's magnetic field, to keep the continent suspended like a colossal floating leaf. But those who study this theory admit quietly that the metal doesn't match any known element, and tools break when they try to extract samples, as though the continent refuses to be dissected. And yet, despite the mystery, life goes on above the clouds as naturally as anywhere else. Families build homes, farmers cultivate fields, children learn their history. But the origin of the continent is always there in the background, an unsolved puzzle woven into everyday life, reminding everyone that they are living on a miracle. People walking through the forests often come across strange formations, stone arches, spiraling towers, fragments of structures partially fused into the ground, as if a civilization once walked here long before the continent ever learned to float. At dusk, when the light catches the underside of certain cliffs, some swear they can see a faint grid of glowing patterns coursing through the rock, lines that flicker like old circuitry beneath the surface, and scholars gather in semi-secret circles to discuss whether the continent is not just floating, but navigating, subtly adjusting its position across the sky, as though following a path only it can perceive. And so, as you grow up hearing these stories, walking these ancient pathways, and feeling the soft hum beneath your feet, you begin to sense that the continent is more than land. It is a relic, a guardian, a silent vessel carrying its inhabitants through the heavens, and whether born of nature or crafted by forgotten hands, it becomes impossible not to feel a deep, almost reverent connection to the mystery that holds your entire world aloft. Walking across the floating continent for the first time feels like stepping into a dream that hasn't decided whether it wants to be real or imaginary, because every direction you look offers something your mind tries to classify but cannot quite place within the boundaries of normal earthly experience. The ground beneath your feet is solid, warm from the sun, filled with familiar textures, grass, soil, clusters of wildflowers. But the moment you lift your gaze, the world reveals its strangeness. In full, with an endless ocean of clouds stretching outward in a soft, curved tapestry that seems to rise and fall like distant hills sculpted from mist, creating the illusion that the continent isn't floating above the sky, but sailing across it like a slow, majestic vessel. On clear days, the cloud layer looks almost alive, rippling gently with the shifting air currents, and you can lose yourself for minutes, even hours, watching the patterns form and dissolve, as if the sky were breathing, each exhale a wave of rolling white, each inhale a sudden stillness that blankets everything in quiet. Standing at the heart of the continent, you notice something that only becomes obvious with time. The horizon doesn't behave like a normal horizon. It curves inward, subtly bending just enough that you feel like you're inside a shallow bowl of sky, where the edges of the world tilt upward rather than downward, as though the clouds themselves are cradling the land from below. This, Curvature creates a strange optical phenomenon during sunrise and sunset, when the light hits the cloud layer at an angle that makes the entire lower world glow like molten gold, casting warm reflections upward onto the underside of leaves, rooftops, and cliffs, so that everything above the clouds seems to shine with its own light. Fields sparkle, rivers shimmer, and the air fills with a gentle radiance that feels almost holy. And as you walk closer to the edges, the view becomes even more surreal. The clouds no longer appear flat or distant, but transform into towering formations that rise like slow-motion waterfalls, drifting upward and dissolving before they reach your feet, creating thick white curtains that occasionally part to reveal the faintest glimpses of the world far below, patches of land, dark shapes of mountain peaks, and rarely the flicker of lightning from storms that live and die entirely beneath the cloud ocean. Forests on the continent grow differently than those on Earth, shaped by constant wind and richer sunlight, their branches bending gracefully in one direction, like dancers frozen mid-motion. And in some regions, the trees grow so tall and slender that their tops sway visibly, casting shifting shadows that glide across open fields. Rivers here follow unusual paths, sometimes flowing toward the center of the continent rather than the edge, fed by condensers that pull moisture directly from the sky beneath, causing thin veils of mist to drift upwards and refill the waterways in quiet cycles that feel too deliberate to be natural. Even the mountains behave differently, rising sharply but never towering, as if they too understand that reaching too high would break the illusion of balance that holds this world aloft. And from the highest ridges, you can see the cloudscape curve so dramatically that for a moment you might believe you're staring at the surface of another planet, a world made entirely of mist and light. The sheer vastness of it has a calming effect on the mind, the kind of peace that comes from realizing how small you are compared to the sky, yet how intimately connected you feel to everything around you. And as you stand there, listening to the deep hush of the wind and watching the continent's shadow drift softly across the sea of clouds below, it becomes impossible not to feel that this floating land is not just a place to live, but a sanctuary suspended between two skies, one above, one below, holding secrets that no ground dweller could ever truly comprehend. Reaching the edge of the floating continent is an experience so intense and overwhelming that even those who have lived their entire lives above the clouds never fully grow used to it. The transition from open fields, winding paths, and soft hills to the abrupt drop into a glowing void feels like stepping from reality into something that defies every instinct your body has learned about safety, distance, and gravity. Long before you physically arrive at the boundary, you can sense it. The air becomes cooler, thinner, carrying a soft upward pull from the clouds below, and the wind shifts tone, gaining a deeper, hollow resonance that vibrates faintly through the ground, as if the edge itself emits a quiet warning. The land narrows gently before the precipice, not in a way that restricts movement, but as if the continent, aware of its own fragility, tapers into a graceful curve that guides travelers toward a series of natural terraces overlooking the infinite whiteness. And each terrace is dotted with wind-shaped rocks, plants that cling to the soil with braided roots, and observation posts built by generations who understood that the edge was not just dangerous, but sacred. When you finally step close enough to look down, the sight steals the breath from your chest. There is no visible bottom, only a swirling mass of luminous clouds that shift slowly like a living sea, glowing from within as sunlight filters through multiple layers of mist, creating shimmering patterns that pulse in waves, as if the world below were breathing in slow motion. Some days the clouds are calm and smooth, forming a soft, motionless blanket that seems solid enough to walk on, while on other days they churn and spiral in towering formations, sending long fingers of vapor curling upward along the cliffs, brushing against your feet before dissolving into cool droplets that cling to your skin. And then there are the legendary silver veils, rare atmospheric events when thin sheets of reflective mist rise from the depths and hang motionless along the edge, turning the entire boundary into a mirror that reflects the sky above. Birds fly past and seem to vanish into themselves. The sun casts double rays, and for a moment, standing at the precipice feels like standing between two identical worlds. Despite the beauty, the edge holds dangers that everyone learns from childhood. Strong gusts of downward wind that appear without warning, sudden collapses of cloud structures that trigger violent updrafts, and the rare yet terrifying silent thunders, deep rumbles that echo from far below and vibrate through the bones of the continent, hinting at storms hidden beneath the cloud ocean that no one has ever seen but everyone respects. To prevent accidents, generations of inhabitants have shaped the edge with a series of wide stone balustrades, carved fences made of dense skywood, and lookout towers anchored deep into the rock. Yet none of these barriers feel intrusive. They blend into the landscape like natural extensions of the cliffs themselves, reminding everyone that life up here is both free and fragile. Children are taught early on to approach the edge with a mixture of reverence and responsibility, and many families make a ritual of watching the evening light fall across the cloud abyss, gathering on blankets to witness the sun sink behind the horizon, only to watch its last rays ignite the lower layers of mist in crimson, lavender, and soft pearl colors, creating a second inverted sunset beneath their feet. Sometimes, if the wind is quiet enough, you can hear faint echoes rising from the depths, whispers, distant booms, or something like faraway singing, which most dismiss as atmospheric anomalies, though elders claim they are the voices of ancient storms wandering the world below. At night, the edge becomes even more surreal, because the cloud surface reflects starlight like an enormous trembling mirror, turning the abyss into a shimmering ocean of silver, and if the moon is full, it casts a long ribbon of brightness across the cloud tops, creating the illusion of a shining pathway leading downward into the unknown. And as you stand there, feet rooted in warm soil, heart racing with awe, skin tingling from the cool mist drifting upward, you realize why so many poems, legends, and songs from this world begin with the same image. A lone figure at the edge of the floating continent, staring into eternity, suspended between sky and sky, humbled by the knowledge that their entire world floats on nothing but air and mystery. If living on a floating continent already feels like existing inside a dream, then looking upward is what truly convinces you that your entire world is suspended between realities, because the sky above the sky behaves differently than anywhere else on Earth, bending light, shaping clouds, and creating illusions that leave even lifelong residents quietly speechless. From the surface of the continent, the upper atmosphere feels impossibly close, as if someone reached up and gently lowered the heavens just enough for you to notice details no ground dweller could ever see. Thin streaks of cold vapor flowing like rivers across the blue, faint concentric patterns rippling outward from invisible pressure fronts, and shimmering halos forming around birds and sky creatures as they glide between sunbeams with feathers that catch the light like glass. During certain mornings, when the air is crisp and the breeze steady, the upper sky pales into a soft silver-blue gradient, so smooth and delicate it looks almost painted, and you can see the edge of the stratosphere curve faintly overhead, giving the sensation that the continent rests inside a vast cosmic dome rather than beneath the infinite openness of space. Growing up here, you learn that weather above the clouds is not only calmer, but also more dramatic, because the sun's light has no haze or pollution to scatter through. The colors come through pure, sharp, and impossibly vibrant, which means sunrise is never just sunrise. but an orchestration of golds, ambers, soft pinks, and slow-melting violets that climb upward in shimmering layers, illuminating the tops of airborne mist flows and lighting up the reflective crystal dust carried from the continent's soil by the constant wind. Even more breathtaking are the dual sunsets, the first when the sun sinks behind the horizon, casting long, glowing beams across the land, and the second when its last light hits the cloud ocean below, causing a reverse sunset to bloom. Upward, a glowing reflection that rises from beneath your feet and paints the underside of everything in molten red, peach, and rose gold hues. Trees, houses, mountains, even your own shadow becomes stained with color in a spectacle so surreal that visitors often cry the first time they witness it. And when night falls, the sky transforms again, revealing constellations far clearer than anywhere on the surface world, each star pulsing softly like a lantern hung in the darkness, made sharper by the thin, clean air of the high altitude. There are nights when the atmosphere becomes so still that you can see the faint trace of the Milky Way stretching across the entire sky like a river of ice. And other nights when gentle auroras appear, not because of magnetic storms, but because of tiny, naturally occurring particles in the upper air that catch moonlight and scatter it sideways, producing pale green and silver ribbons that drift slowly from horizon to horizon. Sometimes, during seasons when the air currents shift, a rare phenomenon occurs. Sky blooms, clusters of luminous jellyfish-like organisms that rise from below the clouds and float upward into the higher sky, glowing softly as they pulse with bioluminescent light. Their slow ascent, making it appear as if the stars themselves are growing larger and descending toward the continent. Children grow up believing these creatures are the souls of explorers who ventured too far and chose to remain in the sky forever. And even adults, though they know the scientific explanation, can't help but feel a quiet shiver of wonder when they see dozens of these glowing forms drifting upward like lanterns released into eternity. And then there are the storms. Massive, towering structures that form miles below the continent, yet send their tops soaring upward in colossal thunderheads that you can see forming from above, rising like titans of vapor and light, illuminated from within by distant lightning that flickers silently at first and then, with a low, resonant rumble that vibrates through the land like the slow heartbeat of the world below. From the floating continent, storms are not threats, but spectacles, dancing pillars of cloud, rolling waves of wind that never quite reach you, lightning that glows without striking, and rainbows that bend in full circles beneath your feet instead of arches, creating rings of color that drift across the cloud ocean like floating crowns. And on rare nights when everything aligns perfectly, clear skies above, moonlight bright, winds calm, and the clouds below smooth as glass, you can stand on the highest ridge of the continent and feel, with absolute certainty, that you are suspended between two skies, one infinite and star-filled above you, one glowing and cloud-bound below, a world perched on the quiet edge of the heavens, where even the simplest moments feel like glimpses into a reality more magical than anything the surface world could ever imagine. The climate on a floating continent is unlike anything found on Earth, shaped not by oceans or land masses, but by the delicate choreography between sunlight, altitude, drifting air currents, and the endless cloud ocean below, creating a world where familiar weather patterns behave in unfamiliar ways, and new forms of atmospheric phenomena arise that seem almost magical. Mornings begin with a gentle coolness that settles across the land like a silk sheet, because the continent, suspended miles above the ground, loses heat quickly at night. And when the first rays of sunlight strike, the air warms not from below but from above, spreading a soft gradient of temperature that moves downward like a warm tide rolling over the fields. Breezes are constant here, not violent but steady, humming softly through the grass and trees as they travel across the wide, open plateau, shaped by the height at which the continent floats. These winds are clean and crisp, carrying faint scents of high-altitude moisture and minerals pulled from the clouds far below, and every inhale feels lighter, clearer, and strangely energizing, as if the air itself has fewer burdens. Because the continent floats above the cloud layer, traditional rain almost never falls here the way it does on the surface world. Instead, moisture rises in delicate plumes from the clouds below, drifting upward in slow, spiraling curtains that gather along the cliffs and flow across the land like silent fog, settling into valleys and forests where it condenses into sparkling dew, so abundant that in some areas it forms small pools called sky basins, natural reservoirs fed not by rainfall but by the breathing cycle of the clouds themselves. Storms behave differently too. Thunderstorms grow and die far beneath the continent, sending flashes of light upward through the clouds like distant fireworks muffled by miles of vapor. And though you can see the towering tops of these storms pushing upward like mountains of dark cotton, you never feel the rain, the wind, or the thunder directly, only the faint tremor that ripples through the air when lightning strikes below. A gentle vibration that many residents describe as the earth trying to speak from far away. Instead of rain, the floating continent has sky drifts, thin curtains of shimmering droplets that rise instead of fall, forming when updrafts become strong enough to carry moisture high into the upper air, creating soft, glittering veils that glide horizontally across the land like ghostly rivers of pearls, suspended in the wind. Walking through them feels like stepping through cool breath, and the droplets cling to your eyelashes and hair in tiny crystalline beads that evaporate moments later, leaving behind nothing but a refreshing tingle. Because of the altitude, sunlight is uniquely intense, yet gentle. The sky is clearer, the clouds below reflect light upward, and on some afternoons the light bends in strange ways, creating circular rainbows around your shadow, or shimmering halos around buildings, trees, and even animals, as if everything on the continent carries its own quiet aura. Temperatures shift slowly across the day, creating long, comfortable stretches of mild warmth rather than harsh heat, and nights cool off quickly, but without ever plunging into true cold. There's a steady softness to the climate, as though the continent is protected by its position between worlds. Winters don't bring snowstorms, but rather sky frost, a delicate crystalline dust that forms when moisture condenses in the upper atmosphere and settles downward in sparkling showers, coating the landscape in a thin layer of glittering frost that crunches softly underfoot before melting at the first touch of sunlight. Winds at the edge of the continent can be stronger, shaped by the dramatic drop into the clouds, creating steady upward currents that carry leaves, seeds, and even lightweight creatures into the air for long, gliding journeys across the land, and many plants have evolved to use this wind as part of their life cycle, sending pollen and seeds drifting across the sky like tiny lantern sparks. And perhaps the most mesmerizing climate event of all is the sky tide, a slow rhythmic rise and fall of the cloud ocean caused by deep meteorological cycles. Twice a day, the cloud layer climbs higher, filling the edge of the continent with thick mist that spills gently across the cliffs, rolling into the forests in long white waves before retreating again hours later, exposing the endless drop below. During these sky tides, the entire world feels as though it's breathing calmly, inhaling and exhaling with a rhythm older than any culture. And residents often pause whatever they're doing to simply watch the mist rise, letting its cool fingers brush their skin as they stand at the boundary between earth and sky, reminded once again that they live in a place shaped not just by land and weather, but by wonder itself. Daily life on the floating continent feels both familiar and utterly extraordinary, blending the rhythm of ordinary human routines with the breathtaking presence of the sky that surrounds everything. Waking up here means opening your eyes to soft sunlight filtered through thin, high-altitude air, and listening for the gentle hum that resonates through the land each morning as shifting air currents realign beneath the continent. A subtle vibration that acts almost like a natural alarm clock. You don't hear it as much as you feel it, a quiet reminder that the world you live on is always moving, always drifting, always breathing. People step outside their homes and immediately face views that would be considered miraculous anywhere else. Fields stretching into calm horizons, forests swaying under a sky that seems close enough to touch, and the cloud ocean below shimmering gently as rising mist curls upward along the cliffs. Children walk to school along winding paths carved into glowing limestone, their footsteps echoing softly as they chase each other, their laughter floating effortlessly into the air, carried away by the ever-present breeze. Teachers begin lessons by opening wide sunlit windows that bring in cool drafts carrying faint scents of cloud vapor, and it's common for entire classrooms to pause mid-lesson when a flock of sky whales or long-winged birds glides just below the cloud surface, creating massive shadows that drift silently across the landscape like gentle giants passing beneath a glass floor. Work on the floating continent follows its own rhythm. Farmers tend fields that receive more direct sunlight than any surface world farm could ever hope for, cultivating crops adapted to the mild climate and thinner air, while artisans craft tools and furniture designed to withstand the constant wind, their workshops filled with the soothing sound of wooden chimes, woven banners, and soft clattering produced by the breeze blowing through crafted windports. Transportation is slow and graceful here, not because people lack technology, but because the altitude demands respect. Villagers travel on glider carts pulled by small sky beasts or use breezeways, long stone paths built along natural wind channels where people can walk for miles with barely any effort, as the wind itself helps push them forward. In the central towns, markets bloom like vibrant pockets of life, filled with colorful cloths that flutter in the wind, fruits grown in high altitude, orchards and lanterns crafted from translucent cloudstone, a mineral that absorbs sunlight and glows softly at night. Daily meals are simple but comforting. Warm breads steamed using moisture gathered from rising mist, fruits chilled naturally by the high winds of dawn, and teas brewed from leaves grown in nutrient-rich sky soil, each sip carrying a faint floral sweetness. Evenings are one of the most cherished parts of life above the clouds. Families gather on balconies or terraces carved into the cliffs, sharing stories as they watch the dual sunset unfold. First the sky darkens above, then the clouds below ignite in soft oranges, pinks, and golds, creating the illusion that the world is glowing from underneath. Children often fall asleep on their parents' laps during these moments, lulled by the soothing sound of wind brushing past the cliffs or the distant hum of creatures migrating between the cloud layers. Even chores carry a poetic quality here, harvesting mist from condensers on cool nights, polishing wind chimes that help predict storm patterns below, or tending to rooftop gardens where plants grow toward the sky with unusual vigor, nourished by long hours of sunlight. And throughout daily life, there is a deep cultural understanding that the floating continent is not just a place to live, but a delicate balance between nature, mystery, and the sky itself. People speak in soft tones when discussing the land, walk carefully at the edges, and teach their children from the earliest age that respect for the wind is as essential as knowing how to breathe. This reverence shapes everything, from festivals celebrating the shifting air currents to quiet rituals performed at dawn when the first rays of sunlight kiss the cloud ocean. And as you move through your day, walking familiar paths, working with your hands, sharing meals with your family, there's always a sense that life here flows in harmony with something ancient and unseen, something that anchors your world even as it floats endlessly above the earth below, reminding everyone that ordinary life can still feel extraordinary when lived suspended between two skies. Agriculture on the floating continent is a quiet miracle of its own, shaped by sunlight that arrives cleaner and purer than anywhere on the surface world, by winds that carry nutrients from distant cloud formations, and by soil enriched over centuries by the slow accumulation of airborne minerals. Farmers here don't simply grow crops, they tend living tapestries of plants uniquely adapted to high-altitude life, with broad leaves designed to capture thin sunlight efficiently, deep root systems that anchor into soil constantly brushed by wind, and fruit-bearing shrubs that have evolved thicker skins to resist the cool, crisp air of dawn. Walking through the agricultural terraces carved into the landscape feels like wandering through a patchwork quilt of color. Emerald fields of wind grain swaying like waves on an ocean, rows of skyroot trees with their pale blue leaves rustling softly, clusters of glow lily flowers that open only during the brief transitional hours between day and night, releasing a faint bioluminescent shimmer that guides evening workers across the gently sloping farmland. Irrigation works differently up here, relying not on rain, but on the natural rise of moisture from the cloud ocean. Condensers placed along the cliffs gather dew that forms from upward moving mist, channeling it through a network of wooden troughs that snake across the fields, sending cool streams of water trickling past planting beds and into collection pools where it is treated with mineral-rich stones to enhance the crop's flavor and growth. Because sunlight is so consistent, crops grow in gentle cycles rather than rigid seasons, with farmers harvesting small amounts throughout the year rather than relying on singular planting periods. And this steady rhythm of work creates a peaceful, almost meditative pace to daily life. The sound of tools brushing through soil, the snap of wind grain husks, the soft murmur of workers talking while the breeze tugs gently at their clothing. Like a patient companion, some of the most distinctive foods grown above the clouds include cloudberries, small translucent fruits that taste like a blend of peach and mint and glow faintly under moonlight due to the minerals absorbed during the sky tides, and mistleaf greens, plants that pull moisture directly from the air and are prized for their crisp texture and clean, refreshing flavor. Livestock is different here too, consisting mostly of high-altitude animals adapted to strong winds and open spaces, feathered sky goats with soft gliding membranes beneath their legs, longhorn drifting cattle known for their calm temperament and ability to graze on steep terraces, and flocks of cloudfowl, small, round birds with wings too weak for flight, but bodies well insulated for the cool nights, producing eggs with unusually vibrant yolks. Meals prepared from these ingredients carry the unmistakable taste of the sky, lighter, fresher, more aromatic, so that even simple dishes like warm sky grain, porridge or glow lily broth feel comforting in ways that surface world visitors struggle to describe. Marketplaces near the center of the continent overflow with baskets of colorful produce, woven sacks filled with fragrant herbs, and jars of dew honey harvested from bees that build their hives along the misty cliffs. Each ingredient reflects the environment that nurtured it, the brightness of sunlight reflected from the cloud ocean, the chill of wind-swept nights, and the subtle minerals swirling in the mist that rises and falls like the breath of the world. Farming communities here hold deep respect for their land, understanding that the floating continent provides generously but must be treated gently. Every cut made to the soil is followed by a ritual of gratitude. Every harvest begins with a quiet moment facing the cloud horizon, giving thanks for the balance that keeps their home suspended in the sky. Children grow up learning to identify the different skyborne pests that drift up from the cloud ocean during warm seasons, soft-winged moths that feed on wind grain, tiny thread beetles that cling to mistleaf stems, and they are taught how to manage them using natural methods rather than harsh chemicals, preserving both the purity of the air and the delicate balance of the ecosystem. And as day fades into the golden haze of evening, farmers gather at the edges of their fields to watch the downward glow of the second sunset reflect across their crops, bathing everything in warm light, while cool breezes carry the scent of freshly harvested skyroot and the distant hum of cloudfowl settling into their nests. In these moments, it becomes clear that agriculture on the floating continent is more than a means of survival. It's a harmony between the people and the sky itself, a relationship cultivated over generations, where every seed planted, every drop of mist collected, and every crop harvested is part of a greater cycle that sustains not just bodies, but the very soul of a world suspended above the clouds. Architecture on the floating continent is a breathtaking blend of necessity, artistry, and respect for the sky, shaped not only by the people who live here, but also by the wind itself, which has served as both architect and sculptor for generations. Walking through the villages and cities above the clouds is like wandering through a world designed to move, breathe, and exist in harmony with the air, where nothing is built to defy the sky. Everything is built to dance with it. Houses cling to the gentle slopes of the land like delicate shells, constructed from lightweight but sturdy skywood, harvested from high-altitude trees whose fibers naturally resist constant winds, and the walls are reinforced with cloudstone, a pale, shimmering mineral that refracts sunlight into soft glows, making entire neighborhoods appear as though they're lit from within during sunrise and sunset. The roofs, curved like sailboat hulls turned upside down, are designed to catch and redirect wind currents, giving each home a natural airflow that keeps interiors cool during warm daylight hours and protected during colder nights. And these flowing rooflines create a sense of motion even when the world is still, as if each structure is quietly drifting along with the continent. Narrow footbridges carved from skywood connect homes and gardens, stretching over small dips in the terrain and swaying gently with each step, offering views of the cloud ocean below that can take your breath away every single time. Even residents who've lived here for decades pause at these bridges to appreciate the sight of soft white mist rolling beneath their feet like an endless tide. In the larger towns, buildings grow taller but never too heavy, constructed with central wind pillars that allow air to pass through their cores, preventing pressure from building up and ensuring that storms below don't create dangerous uplift. The tallest structures are the observatories, slender towers with wide circular platforms, on top where scholars and sky cartographers chart the movement of stars, study wind patterns that shift the continent's course, and monitor the rare but powerful light storms that flicker within the deeper cloud layers. Walking through the streets of these elevated towns feels like entering a living painting. Colorful banners flutter above doorways, chimes of carved bone and crystal sing softly in the breeze, and every building is angled slightly toward the horizon, as if all of them are perpetually listening to the distant hum coming from the land below. Open-air market squares feature circular layouts to allow wind to flow naturally through them, and woven canopies are strung between buildings, creating gentle shade while still letting soft beams of light pass through like shimmering threads. The stones used for walkways are sourced from high-altitude quarries and polished until they reflect the colors of the sky, turning entire plazas into shifting mosaics of blue, silver, and soft gold, depending on the time of day. Balconies are essential to life here. Every home has at least one, often facing the cloud ocean, built with reinforced curved railings that guide the wind upward instead of letting it press against the structure. These balconies serve as gathering places where families eat meals, children watch sky creatures drift below the continent, and friends share stories while feeling the soft mist that rises when the cloud tides shift. Deeper into the continent, near the cliffs, lies a remarkable architectural marvel called the skywalks. Massive, semi-transparent walkways extending outward over the abyss, built from a mixture of cloudstone and hardened sky glass that allows visitors to stand hundreds of meters past the edge and look straight down into the swirling white void, giving the sensation of floating unsupported in the sky. Beneath the continent, reachable only by engineers and maintenance workers, exists a hidden world of inverted structures, anchor chambers, wind tunnels, and stabilization rings that glow faintly with unknown energy, creating a soft, pulsating light that shines upward through cracks and crevices, hinting at mysteries few ever witness. And weaving through all of this architecture like veins of light, run hundreds of sky lanterns mounted on poles and rooftops, capturing sunlight during the day and releasing it slowly at night, illuminating the continent with a gentle glow that never overwhelms the darkness, but instead blends seamlessly with the stars above and the shimmering cloud reflection below. At night, walking through these softly lit streets feels like drifting through a dream where gravity holds less power, where silence carries the voice of the wind, and where each building, shaped, anchored, and guided by the sky itself, reminds you that life here is a constant dialogue between the human spirit and the boundless world of air and light in which it floats. Beneath the peaceful fields, the soft terraces, and the wind-swept forests of the floating continent lies a hidden network of ancient mechanisms and shimmering conduits that no one fully understands. A system so old and so deeply integrated into the land that it blurs the line between technology and geology, natural wonder and engineered miracle. Most residents never see this hidden underworld, but everyone grows up hearing whispers about it. Stories of glowing tunnels carved into the bedrock, chambers filled with faint humming vibrations, and massive structures that pulse gently like mechanical hearts, keeping the entire continent suspended far above the clouds. The technology begins deep within the underside of the continent, accessible only from narrow passageways guarded by windlocks, intricate gates designed to withstand the violent air currents that whip across the lower surface where the land meets open sky. Engineers who work there describe the underside as a place of eternal twilight, a dim blue glow rising from the cloud ocean below, shafts of light from above filtering through cracks in the stone, and enormous support ridges that extend outward like skeletal wings, stabilizing the continent's weight as it drifts across the heavens. Embedded into these ridges are lattice-like veins made of an unknown material, a metallic substance harder than steel yet lighter than hollow bone, with properties that change depending on altitude and air pressure. Sometimes smooth and cool like polished stone, other times warm and faintly vibrating as if alive. These metallic veins connect to central stabilization cores, massive cylindrical chambers carved deep into the stone and lined with rotating rings that emit a low, resonant hum. A sound so deep and calming that workers often describe feeling it in their bones long before they hear it with their ears. These rings spin not with mechanical gears, but with a strange floating motion, as though suspended by magnetic forces, far stronger and more stable than anything known in the surface world, and each rotation produces a gentle upward pull, an anti-gravitational pressure that disperses evenly beneath the continent, creating the buoyant lift that keeps the entire landmass from falling back to Earth. The cores are powered by an energy source that has remained a mystery for generations, an iridescent substance called aurastone, found only in tiny pockets within the deepest tunnels. This stone emits a soft, shifting light that cycles through colors, blue, violet, gold, depending on the temperature and the surrounding air density, and when placed inside the core chambers, it resonates with the spinning rings, amplifying the upward force in a controlled, stable rhythm. Scholars believe this technology is far older than the current civilization, possibly predating all known human history. And some theories suggest the continent once served as an observational platform built by an advanced culture from the ancient world. A civilization capable not only of manipulating gravity, but also of blending technology seamlessly with natural ecosystems, creating a kind of biomechanical world where machinery and environment coexist as one. While few records remain, explorers have discovered faded carvings deep in the maintenance tunnels, spiral symbols, star patterns, and depictions of humanoid figures standing beneath twin suns, hinting at an origin story lost to time. The maintenance of these structures Today is more ritual than science. Engineers study airflow patterns, measure the hum of the stabilization rings, and monitor the faint electromagnetic pulses that ripple through the metallic veins, adjusting ancient controls whose function they only partially understand, trusting that the continent itself will guide them as it has guided generations before. Despite the age of the mechanism, it remains astonishingly stable. Storms below may rage with violent force, lightning may flash like furious fire in the cloud ocean, but the continent barely trembles, floating serenely through the sky as though sheltered by unseen hands. The entire population understands that this system must be respected, not exploited, and a deep cultural reverence surrounds the maintenance chambers. Workers perform quiet rituals before entering, placing their palms against the stone to feel the hum of the rings and acknowledge the ancient power that supports their entire world. And though modern scholars continue to research the origins of the floating continent, using light mapping tools and atmospheric sensors to study its movement, the truth remains shrouded in mystery. No one knows where the aura stone first came from, how the rings were built, or why the mechanisms never fail. But every time the land shifts gently on the wind and the sky glows beneath their feet, the people above the clouds are reminded that they are living not just on a continent, but atop a quiet, ancient marvel, an engineering masterpiece woven into the bones of the earth itself, suspended forever between sky and sky. Visiting the underside of the floating continent is an experience so rare and overwhelming that only a handful of people ever attempt it in their lifetimes, and even fewer speak about it afterward, with anything more than a quiet reverence, as though describing something sacred and indescribable. Reaching this hidden world requires descending through narrow tunnels carved into the bedrock, tunnels lit only by faint pulses of blue-white light that leak through cracks in the ancient metallic, veins illuminating the stone walls with soft patterns that shift subtly as though responding to your breath and footsteps. The air grows cooler the deeper you descend, carrying a metallic tang mixed with the unmistakable scent of storm vapor rising from the cloud ocean below, and the soft hum of the stabilization cores grows louder, not in volume, but in presence. You feel it vibrating against your ribs, humming through your bones, as if the continent itself is acknowledging your approach. After what feels like hours of descending through twisting corridors, you emerge into a vast cavern whose ceiling stretches into shadow and whose floor opens abruptly into a dizzying expanse of open air, because the underside of the continent is not a flat surface, but a sprawling landscape of inverted cliffs, ridges, and stone arches that curve downward like the inside of a colossal upturned bowl. The rock here is darker, smoother, shaped by centuries of wind erosion into organic flowing forms that resemble frozen waves or the rippled underside of giant wings, and threading through these natural sculptures are glowing lines of the ancient metallic lattice, pulsing faintly with golden and sapphire hues as they channel energy through the stabilization system. Platforms suspended by thick braids of sky fiber rope stretch from the cavern wall into the open air, swaying gently above the cloud abyss, serving as working stations for the engineers who monitor the mechanical veins and inspect the joints where the stabilizing rings anchor the continent's mass. Stepping onto one of these platforms is like stepping into the sky itself. Beneath your feet lies nothing but a vast ocean of clouds churning thousands of feet below, glowing softly with reflected sunlight during the day and shimmering with ghostly silver light at night. And above your head loom the massive formations of rock and metallic conduits that hold the world together like the ribs of an ancient creature. The climate here is harsher than on the surface. The winds rise and fall unpredictably, creating pockets of stillness followed by sharp gusts that push against the platforms with enough force to rattle the chains, and every sound feels amplified in the cavernous space. from the creaking of wood to the faint clink of tools against stone. The engineers who work here move with deliberate calm, wearing harnesses woven from wind-resistant fabric, their bodies swaying naturally with the motions of the hanging platforms as they reach into glowing crevices or brush dust from the metallic veins that pulse beneath layers of rock. They speak of the underside as if it were alive, describing how the pulses in the conduits accelerate during cloud surges, how the hum deepens during sky tides, and how sometimes, without warning, the lattice glows more brightly as though responding to invisible stresses or unseen forces far below. Legends among the workers tell of strange phenomena witnessed here, shadowy shapes moving. Within the clouds, bursts of silent lightning that coil upward like luminous serpents, and rare moments when the clouds part completely, revealing brief, haunting glimpses of the ground world miles beneath the continent, so far away that mountains look like soft bumps and rivers like thin silver threads. But even these sights pale compared to the cavern's most astonishing feature, the Skyheart aperture, a massive circular opening carved into the deepest part of the underside, directly beneath. The central stabilization core. The aperture is rimmed with ancient symbols whose meaning has been lost to time, and from its center rises a column of shimmering light, a beam of energy that pulses rhythmically, expanding and contracting like a heartbeat, connecting the continent not just to the cloud ocean below, but to something deeper, something that resonates through the rock and metal like a memory. Standing near the aperture, you feel weightless for a split second, as though gravity itself hesitates, unsure of how to behave in the presence of such a concentrated force, and the air around it vibrates softly with tones so low they feel like distant thunder, muffled by centuries of stone. The underside of the continent is not a place of fear, but of awe, a reminder that every peaceful moment enjoyed above the clouds is supported by ancient power and delicate balance hidden just out of sight, sustained by mechanisms older than any living memory. And as you ascend back toward the surface, following the winding tunnels that lead upward into the warm sunlight and gentle breezes of the upper world, you carry with you a deep understanding that life on the floating continent is suspended between wonder and mystery, supported by a silent guardian beneath your feet that has kept the land aloft for generations, and may continue to do so long after your footsteps have faded from its stone corridors. The flora and fauna of the floating continent form an ecosystem unlike anything found on the surface world, shaped by constant wind, high-altitude sunlight, and the vast cloud ocean that breathes beneath the land like a living sea. Walking through the forests here feels like entering a realm sculpted by the sky itself, where trees grow tall and graceful with trunks that twist gently upward as if reaching for the cool currents drifting overhead, their leaves shimmering with subtle pearlescent tones caused by minerals carried upward through the mist. Many plants have evolved to interact directly with the wind. Sky willows with long, ribbon-like leaves that sway in hypnotic patterns, producing soft, harmonic sounds that guide pollinating insects. Windvine creepers that stretch across rocks and cliff faces, their tendrils tipped with feathered filaments designed to catch airborne seeds and moisture. And suncrest flowers, bright golden blossoms that open only at the highest point of daylight when the sunlight passes cleanly through the thin atmosphere and paints the petals with fiery brilliance, attracting sky bees that hover on translucent wings, leaving trails of shimmering dust as they move from bloom to bloom. Deeper in the forests, broadleaf aura ferns unfurl enormous fronds that glow faintly at night, absorbing ambient light reflected off the clouds below and releasing it slowly like a soft breath, illuminating the forest floor with pale green radiance that makes nighttime walks feel like drifting through an underwater dream. But as mesmerizing as the plants are, the animals of the floating continent are even more extraordinary. Adapted to life where one misstep could mean tumbling into the endless sea of clouds, they have developed unique anatomical traits that make them appear almost mythical. One of the most iconic creatures is the sky whale, a gentle giant of the mist with a body shaped like a cross between a manta ray and an enormous bird. Its wings, spanning the length of small buildings, gliding through the updrafts beneath the continent with slow, deliberate movements, feeding on clusters of floating spores that rise from the cloud ocean during warm hours. Their calls, deep, resonant tones, echo through the cliffs, vibrating gently through the stone and giving the impression of distant songs sung by the sky itself. Smaller but equally captivating are the cliff gliders, fox-like creatures with soft, wind-resistant fur and expandable membranes. Along their limbs that allow them to leap from one ledge to another, gliding effortlessly for dozens of meters while hunting for cloud moths, translucent winged insects that drift up from the mist in shimmering swarms. Flocks of glintwings fill the skies during morning hours, tiny birds with mirrored feathers that reflect sunlight in dazzling bursts, creating swirling ribbons of color that dance above the treetops like living auroras. Near the cliffs, you might find sky deer, nimble creatures with elongated legs and lightweight bones, moving in graceful, nearly silent steps as if the wind itself carries part of their weight. Even the predators here have adapted to the airy heights. Cloud panthers, sleek and silvery, with whiskers sensitive enough to detect pressure changes in the wind, allowing them to predict sudden gusts long before they occur. These elusive hunters blend so seamlessly with the mist that the only signs of their presence are faint paw prints left on dew-coated stones. The lower valleys host herds of drift cattle, placid animals whose thick coats trap warmth during cool nights and whose horns curve backward like polished ivory crescents shaped over generations by constant wind. Tiny ripple hares burrow into soft soil, emerging at dusk to forage among glowing mushrooms that sprout along the roots of ancient trees. And always, circling the higher cliffs, are sky serpents, long ribbon-like reptiles that float using internal gas-filled chambers, shimmering with iridescent scales as they twist through the air like living streams of light. Even the cloud ocean hosts its own hidden life. Shadowy shapes move far below the continent, sometimes breaching the surface in graceful arcs that send plumes of mist rising upward, leaving residents above to speculate whether they are enormous fish, drifting leviathans, or something far older and more mysterious. Every creature and plant in this world plays a role in a delicate ecological balance, forming a living tapestry woven by altitude, light, and wind. And as night falls and the glowing plants illuminate the forest, while distant sky whales hum their low songs beneath the land, you can't help but feel that the floating continent is not just a habitat, but an entire living realm suspended between earth and sky, an ecosystem shaped by ancient forces, bound together by harmony, and thriving in a place where the world should not exist, yet does, beautifully and impossibly. Traveling between floating continents is an experience so extraordinary that even seasoned travelers pause in quiet awe each time they begin the journey, because moving from one skyborne world to another feels less like traveling across distance and more like gliding between realms, each one suspended above the clouds like its own drifting island of life. The first step always begins at a skyport, wide open platforms built along the edge of the continent where the horizon seems to stretch forever into silver mist, and where lines of wind-guiding banners flutter overhead, showing the direction and strength of the currents that will carry the vessels through the sky. The vessels themselves are masterpieces of engineering inspired by nature, sleek gliders reinforced with skywood frames, their wings curved like the fins of sky whales, and their undersides lined with kinetic sails that catch upward air currents while stabilizing the craft with gentle pulsations. Boarding one feels like stepping onto the back of a living creature. A subtle vibration hums beneath your feet, the sails flex slightly in anticipation, and the wind whispers through the rigging like a soft, welcoming voice. Travel often begins with a slow push from the launch rails, sending the vessel drifting off the edge of the continent where it dips slightly before catching a rising current, lifting smoothly into open air as the cloud ocean unfurls beneath you in vast, swirling patterns that resemble rolling dunes, made of vapor instead of sand. As you ascend, the view shifts from familiar landscapes to boundless skies, and the floating continent you left behind grows smaller and smaller, revealing its full shape. Sometimes a broad plateau, sometimes a crescent, sometimes a cluster of smaller isles bound together by shared airflow patterns. In the distance, other continents appear like massive drifting worlds glowing softly in the sunlight, their cliffs catching the light with golden edges, their forests forming patches of emerald against the open sky, and their unique shapes giving each one a recognizable identity long before you arrive. The journey itself is as peaceful as a dream. Wind currents carry the vessel in long, sweeping arcs, creating a smooth, gentle motion that lulls passengers into a meditative calm, while translucent sky creatures drift alongside, curious and unbothered by the presence of humans. Sky serpents weave graceful patterns around the vessel, shimmering like strands of liquid silver, and glint-winged birds flash in bursts of color as they chase each other through the open air. On rare days, travelers witness breathtaking phenomena. Cloud blooms rising in slow spirals from the ocean below, forming temporary bridges of mist between continents. Cascades of white fog pouring off the edges of distant landmasses like waterfalls frozen in mid-air, or the magnificent sky arches, natural, rainbow-like bands of concentrated atmospheric color that stretch across the sky, from one continent to another, formed when sunlight strikes high-altitude mineral particles floating between them. Mid-journey, the vessel often passes through pockets of cool, thin air that shimmer with tiny crystals drifting upward, covering the hull in a glistening frost that sparkles under the sun. Occasionally, the glider descends closer to the cloud ocean, allowing travelers to witness massive shapes moving beneath the swirling mist, undulating shadows that might be ancient sky leviathans, or vast schools of cloudfish migrating along unseen currents. Approaching the destination, the vessel ascends once more, guided by subtle adjustments in its kinetic sails, and the new floating continent comes into full view. Its cliffs carved into patterns created by centuries of wind, its architecture distinct and shaped by unique cultures, its forests and rivers forming unfamiliar patterns that reflect its own history and identity. Landing is a smooth descent onto another skyport, where the platform rises to meet the glider, and as you step off, you feel an immediate shift in the air, the scent, the wind temperature, the color of the sky, each continent possessing its own atmospheric fingerprint shaped by altitude, mineral content, and unique cloud patterns below. Travelers often describe a profound feeling in this moment, a recognition that although you remain in the sky, you have crossed into a new world with its own rhythm, its own voice, its own soul. And as you walk along the edge of the new land, watching your home continent drift slowly away across the heavens like a silent companion in the distance, you understand that the floating world is not a single place, but an archipelago of sky islands, each one suspended above the earth, moving gently across the winds like celestial ships, carrying with them stories, people, ecosystems, and mysteries that make the sky feel infinite, alive, and full of wonders waiting to be discovered. Stories and legends are the heartbeat of the floating continent, echoing through generations like soft songs carried by the wind, shaping the beliefs, fears, and dreams of those who live suspended above the cloud ocean. From childhood, people grow up hearing tales whispered by elders during the golden hour of the second sunset, when the clouds below glow with warm colors and the air feels thick with memory. And during these moments, the line between myth and reality becomes beautifully blurred. One of the oldest legends speaks of the sky weavers, ancient beings said to have crafted the floating continents long before recorded time, weaving the land from stray threads of light and molten air, binding them together with the same shimmering energy that pulses through the aurostone veins deep beneath the continent. According to the stories, the weavers placed each continent carefully above the cloud ocean, shaping the currents and winds to keep them drifting in harmony like a constellation of living worlds. And though no one knows if the weavers truly existed, their name appears in carvings found in old tunnels, etched alongside symbols of twin suns and long spirals that mimic the shape of upward winds. Another widely told tale is the myth of the first fall, a somber story about a curious youth who ventured too close to the edge centuries ago and slipped into the cloud ocean, only to be caught by a sky whale that carried them safely back to the cliffs. The youth returned with strange visions of vast creatures swimming beneath the mist, beings so large and ancient that the sky itself trembled around them. And though many believe the story is symbolic, children often leave small offerings of polished stones and wind chimes at the cliffs in hopes of gaining the protection of the sky whales. Then there are the legends of the storm walkers, shadowy figures said to roam the underside of the continent during violent cloud surges, appearing as silhouettes, moving through flashes of lightning, inspecting the stabilizing structures and disappearing whenever they sense human presence. Some say they are spirits of the ancient engineers who built the continent's underside, returning in moments of atmospheric imbalance to ensure the world remains safe. Others insist they are simply tricks of the light, illusions created by reflections of lightning in the metallic veins. But engineers who work below sometimes swear that they've seen shapes watching them. From the mist, tall figures standing impossibly still in places where no human could survive. One of the most beloved myths is that of the night lanterns, said to be the souls of explorers who ventured beyond the horizon and never returned. During certain rare nights when the sky is perfectly still, tiny glowing orbs drift upward from the cloud ocean, rising slowly through the air like floating candles, pulsing with gentle light before dissolving into the darkness above. Elders say these lanterns carry lost stories and forgotten dreams, returning home for one final visit before fading into the stars. And on those nights, entire villages gather in silence on balconies and cliffside terraces to watch the sky fill with soft golden lights, each flicker telling a story no words could fully capture. Travelers from distant continents bring their own myths too, tales of cloud leviathans so massive that their movements create ripples in the cloud ocean, stories of hidden worlds beneath, the mist where ancient cities sleep untouched by time, and rumors of a legendary continent called the High Crown, said to float so high above the others that its forests glow with cosmic light and its rivers flow with shimmering crystal water. Yet perhaps the most haunting legend of all is the Echo Beneath, a story whispered only during quiet nights when the wind is gentle and the stars are bright. According to this tale, if you stand at the edge of the continent long after dark and listen carefully, you might hear a faint echo rising from far below. Not thunder, not wind, but something like a distant, resonant heartbeat far beneath the cloud ocean. Some believe it is the pulse of the energy source that keeps all continents afloat. Others think it is the voice of the world calling out across the sky. And a few claim it is the sleeping breath of a colossal being hidden beneath the clouds, dreaming the continents into existence. Whatever the truth, these legends shape the culture of the sky folk, blending awe, caution and wonder into every aspect of life, reminding them daily that their world is more than floating stone and wind. It is a tapestry of mysteries woven from stories as ancient and vast as the sky itself. Traveling to the farthest edge of the floating continent is a journey that every skyborne resident dreams of at least once in their life, not out of necessity, but out of a quiet yearning to witness the place where their world meets the endless sky, a boundary that feels less like geography and more like a threshold between reality and the unknown. The journey begins with long paths that wind through forests shaped by constant winds, past glowing aura ferns and towering sky willows whose leaves sing gently as travelers pass, until the trees thin out and the land narrows into wide plains where the grass grows shorter. The air feels lighter, and the sound of the cloud ocean rises faintly from below, like the distant breathing of a giant asleep beneath the world. Travelers often camp along these plains, lighting small fires that crackle softly under the starlit sky, while sky whales glide far beneath the cloud surface, their massive shadows drifting slowly across the glowing mist like ancient spirits circling in silence. Further ahead, the ground becomes stonier, shaped by centuries of powerful winds carving deep grooves into the rock, and the path turns into a series of natural stairways, leading upward to the highest elevation of the continent, where the air is crisp and thin, and each breath feels like inhaling a piece of the sky itself. Reaching the final ridge, travelers often pause, not out of exhaustion, but out of reverence, because the view ahead is unlike anything the upper lands can prepare them for. The continent's final cliff, a colossal drop-off that curves gently outward before plunging into pure emptiness. The cloud ocean swirling below in vast, glowing spirals that shift in slow, hypnotic motions, illuminated by the sunlight reflecting through their vapor like molten silver and gold. From this vantage point, the horizon stretches endlessly, with other floating continents drifting silently in the distance like colossal islands adrift in a celestial sea. Their shapes softened by haze, their cliffs shining faintly beneath the sun. The wind at the edge is unlike any wind elsewhere, stronger, deeper, carrying scents from places unseen, vibrating with quiet tones that feel more like a song than weather, as if the sky itself is humming some ancient lullaby. Some travelers bring small offerings, stones, engraved symbols, pieces of cloud glass, to leave at the cliff in acknowledgement of the legends that say the edge is protected by unseen guardians. Remnants of the sky weavers who shaped the world long ago. As you approach the very brink, the stone beneath your feet grows smoother, polished by centuries of footfalls and wind, and the drop becomes so immense that the scale feels impossible to comprehend, the cloud ocean moving so slowly below that it looks frozen in time. Many describe a moment of weightlessness when standing there, as though gravity hesitates, uncertain how to act at the boundary between land and sky, and even the heartbeat seems to quiet itself in response. Some swear they hear faint whispers rising from below, not frightening, but melodic, as if carried upward by the cloud tides. Stories, memories, or perhaps echoes of the ancient mechanisms that keep the continent aloft. A few brave souls, explorers, researchers, dreamers, have stepped beyond the edge using windsuits designed to glide along the upward drafts, disappearing into the mist with hopes of reaching what lies beneath or between the continents. Some return with stories of shimmering caverns inside massive cloud formations, or glimpses of shadowy leviathans drifting just below the mist, their enormous silhouettes moving in perfect silence as though guarding secrets too ancient for human understanding. Others never return at all, becoming part of the legends whispered to children at night, stories of cloud spirits guiding them home, or of their voices joining the strange harmonics carried by the wind. And yet, despite the risks, the journey to the edge remains a cherished pilgrimage, a rite of passage that allows people to feel the true vastness of the world they inhabit, reminding them that even though their continent floats serenely above the earth, it is part of a boundless celestial frontier where every horizon is a doorway and every gust of wind carries the promise of mysteries waiting just beyond sight. Standing there, at the threshold between land and sky, you understand that the floating continent is both sanctuary and frontier, both home and invitation, a reminder that the world is far larger than anything you've ever imagined, and that the sky is not merely a backdrop, but a living, breathing ocean of wonder, stretching endlessly in every direction. Living on a floating continent above the clouds is not merely a matter of geography or physics. It is a way of seeing the world, a mindset shaped by constant reminders of beauty, fragility, mystery, and interconnectedness. And as you reflect on all the landscapes, stories, and wonders that define life here, you begin to understand that everything in this skybound realm carries meaning beyond its physical form. Every morning when sunlight filters through the thin air, illuminating fields of windgrain and forests that sing softly with the breeze, it becomes clear that existence here is inseparable from light itself, from the gentle glow reflecting off the cloud ocean, from the shifting colors painted across the sky, and from the patterns of motion that never cease. Because even the land beneath your feet is always drifting, always listening to the hush of the wind beneath it. Walking through villages built from skywood and cloudstone, you feel the presence of a civilization shaped not by conquest or expansion, but by adaptation, patience, and reverence for forces far older than memory. Forces that built the mechanisms deep below the rock and shaped the winds that guide the continent across the heavens. And when you hear the distant songs of sky whales resonating from beneath the mist, or the tinkling of wind chimes hanging on balconies overlooking the abyss, you're reminded that life here exists in harmony with creatures and ecosystems that evolved uniquely in this altitude, weaving together a tapestry of symbiotic relationships that could never form in the world below. As you recall the glowing flora of the night forests, ferns that shine like submerged lanterns, flowers that absorb starlight and release it in soft pulses, you realize that beauty here is quiet, patient, and deeply rooted in the rhythms of the natural world. Then there are the myths, the stories told around fires during the second sunset, tales of ancient weavers sculpting continents from light, cloud, leviathans stirring in the depths of the mist, and travelers who vanished into the horizon only to return as glowing lanterns rising from the cloud ocean. All these legends reflect humanity's everlasting desire to understand the unknown, to give shape to the mysteries that surround them, and to find meaning in a world too vast to fully comprehend. But perhaps the most profound part of living above the clouds is the sense of perspective that comes from standing at the very edge of the continent, looking down into the swirling expanse of the cloud ocean and out toward other drifting lands, moving gracefully across the sky. You feel smaller and larger at the same time, humbled by the immensity of the world, yet uplifted by the realization that you are part of something impossibly beautiful, something woven from ancient engineering, natural wonder, and stories carried by the wind. And in this moment, whether you are a lifelong skyborne traveler or simply an observer imagining this world from afar, you understand why the people who live here walk with a certain calmness in their steps, speak with gentleness, and carry gratitude in their hearts. Because every day spent between the sky above and the sky below is a reminder that life itself is a delicate balance, held aloft by forces we only partially understand, but sustained by trust, curiosity, and the quiet hope that the world, no matter how mysterious, will continue to drift peacefully across the heavens. As you settle into the quiet of the evening, watching the cloud ocean glow with the last light of day, listening to the soft vibrations of the land as it breathes, you feel a sense of serenity that only a place like this can offer, a deep, soothing certainty that even in a universe larger than imagination, there are still sanctuaries of wonder and beauty, places where the impossible becomes home, and where living among the clouds teaches you that the sky is not the limit, but the beginning.